Hey everyone, this is Steve, curator of the MHS Military Collection with the inaugural episode of Keep 'em Rolling, a channel dedicated to preserving the memory of what the United States Armed Forces did during World War II. Now my goal for this channel is to share with all of you unique items from the collection, new acquisitions, to offer preservation and collecting tips, and to take all of you on the occasional outside collecting adventure and visits to historic sites that focus on our country's military heritage. Now, before we get started with this inaugural episode, I do want to give a shout out to JohnBoy09. JohnBoy09's channel focuses on collecting militaria, primarily World War II, although he does drift into World War I, Korea, Vietnam, and the like. But what makes his channel so fantastic, and I will have a link posted here, is his passion for collecting and the fact that he likes to demonstrate the various historic weapons within his collection. So that's JohnBoy09. I encourage all of you to check out his channel. For this kickoff episode, I decided to pull several uniforms to share with all of you with the theme of the United States Navy during World War II. I wanted to start with this Navy jumper right here. I've had a few people look at this, and some actually feel it might be pre-war, maybe in that 1938, 1940 range. This jumper I found about 4 weeks ago at an antique shop while I was on a business trip, and I have this game I like to play. When I find a piece of militaria at an antique shop, I like to cover up the tag and then make a guess as to how much they're asking for it, because I have found, unfortunately more often than not, that the prices in antique shops tend to be way high on militaria. I don't know if all of you have found that, and please feel free to leave in the comment section your opinion on this, but for me it always seems to be really high, and this jumper did not disappoint. I guessed a ridiculous price of $50. When I uncovered the tag, lo and behold, $60. Now, the reason it ended up in my collection was because the seller of the item had marked it down from $60 to $30, and then to $15, and finally to $6, a much more reasonable price for a Navy jumper. Now, this was not why I bought this item. You see, I love collecting uniforms, but they take up a huge amount of space, so I find myself having to be rather picky about the types of things that come into my collection. And this goes along with what an old-time collector once told me years and years ago. He said, hey, it is better to buy quality versus quantity. It's better to have 2 or 3 really great uniforms, or 2 or 3 uniforms that fill holes in your collection, than a bunch of uniforms that really aren't special. And I've kind of taken that to heart, and I want to pass that on to all of you, and that is to buy quality versus quantity. And why I acquired this was because of this insignia right here on the sleeve. We have this little shield. This represents the United States Coast Guard. This sailor was a coastie, and I really like the Coast Guard. I feel that the Coast Guard is kind of that unsung branch of the service. You know, not only did they protect our coastlines, the Gulf Coast, Atlantic and Pacific coasts, the Great Lakes, our river systems, but they also served in every major theater of the war. Now, this particular jumper, it's not incredibly rare, but it's not common either, and it was a nice hole that needed filling within my collection, so for $6, it was well worth the purchase. Now, the next uniform I want to share with you is this right here, your standard United States Navy jumper and trousers. It's an almost complete uniform. It's missing the neckerchief and the flat cap. But why I acquired this uniform, and well, before I go any further, I should point out, you may see some of these tags hanging from various uniforms that I show. These are my identification tags, and what I do is I assign each uniform a number, and then I create a file on that uniform with all the information about it, so I can kind of keep track of everything about that uniform. Well, back to this. The reason I acquired this was because, first of all, this is a custom-made jumper. If we zoom in here, you can see the material is just this really fine material, very different than your standard wool. The trousers do match, so it is a custom uniform the sailor had made. You can kind of see an outline here. This outline is actually an interior pocket. This uniform was folded and sat for so long that that interior pocket kind of made an impression on the outside of the uniform there. Now, I bought it because it was custom. I also bought it because it has a nice set of insignia. It has the Navy version of the Amphibious Forces insignia, plus it has his rank and rate of Motor Machinist Mate 3rd class. If he'd been 2nd class, you'd have 2 stripes. 1st class would be 3 stripes. So just nice insignia. But there was a real special reason I bought this. This sailor customized this uniform. Sailors, many of them were always looking for ways to set themselves apart, especially on leave. And one thing that became rather popular was something called Liberty Cuffs. Liberty Cuffs allowed you to be different while wearing a uniform. When you're on the ship, when you're being inspected right before you leave to go on leave, you have your cuffs down. Cuffs are standard. Everything looks fine. You leave the ship, you get out of sight of the ship, you roll up your cuffs, and you show off the insignia on the inside. In this case, a beautiful embroidered dragon. Now this dragon, there's one in this cuff, and there's one over here in this cuff as well. This dragon, you show it off, and it's sewn on a separate panel. So when you come back to the ship after your leave and you go to be inspected, you simply roll this back down before you were in sight of your ship, and it's right back to a passable cuff. Some of these are known to be mermaids, there's fish, there's all different manners of these Liberty Cuffs. This happens to be the dragon, which was one of the more popular. And some of these actually had secret slots where you could slide money into, so you kind of hide it if you were out on leave. You get drunk, you get rolled, they're not going to find your money. So I wanted to show you these Liberty Cuffs because so often when we go looking at military uniforms, we see something that's rather plain and we just walk on by it. I encourage all of you, stop. Look at the uniforms. Turn them inside out. Check the hemlines. Check the tags. Check the pockets. You never know what kind of cool stuff, such as, once again, these Liberty Cuffs that you are going to find in those uniforms. The next uniform I found several months ago at an antique shop down in Florida while I was visiting my parents on vacation. There's a few shops I love to go to, and I just happened to be there when the person that owned the booth was hanging this up. And I stopped and looked at it, and they saw me looking at it and told me that it belonged to their father who had served in the Navy during World War II. I noticed the tag here, which is a World War II tag, about 1944 range. And I had never seen anything like this. They told me that their father was a chief petty officer and that this was a chief petty officer's shirt. I've been collecting for quite a while, and I'd never seen one of these, which goes to show you there's always something new out there, something new to learn. The price was reasonable. It was $20, and I couldn't pass it up because of the quality. They told me that their father did not like the shirt. He simply folded it up, put it in a sea bag, and literally never wore it. It survived because he said they kept the sea bag, and then recently they've been kind of giving things out to family members, his uniform, dog tags, and the like. This was something that was left over that really nobody wanted because it was just a shirt, so they decided they were going to get rid of it and sell it, and I happened to be in the right place at the right time. But this shirt is absolutely stone mint. It supposedly is the second model. The first model would have only had one pocket. This has two pockets. The tag inside, we'll go back to the tag here. It says Naval Clothing Factory. This tag is around 1944 range because it's got on there, if you can see, 100% wool and the size of 15 and a half. The earlier tags did not have the 100% wool or the size, and the later tag changed to Naval Clothing Depot. So it's right there, that 1944-ish range. The shirt is so mint. Even little flaws, you see this little flaw here, and you think, oh, it's got a little moth nip or something to that effect. But no, it's actually thread from the manufacturing process. And to show you how mint this shirt is, the pockets are still tacked shut, if you can believe that. So never, never, ever worn. Now, one thing I do want to point out, you've probably seen on some of my uniforms, these hangers. I look for, at flea markets and antique shops, vintage hangers. This one here, it's kind of neat. I believe it's, I don't know if it says Detroit, Michigan, or what have you. Probably from the 1940s. I love the vintage hangers because they're usually fairly inexpensive, and they last. I used to buy hangers from the local big box stores, and the wooden hangers, they were expensive, and I found I'd hang a uniform on them, and a lot of them, I'd come into my storage room, and the uniform would be on the ground because the hanger broke. These just don't break. And look here, you can see it even it's got the little metal brad all the way through. So one of those tips, if you're collecting vintage uniforms and you need to hang them up, look for the vintage hangers. They last and they look cool as well. On this uniform, we are going to start in close because this is probably one of my favorite uniforms. It ranks in definitely the top 5 in my collection. First of all, inside you can see this beautiful kind of polished silk lining. It's a custom shirt, almost in the Chief Petty Officer style that we just saw. It's made of the blue navy material. It's kind of coarse material. It's made in almost an Ike jacket style. It's short, and it's got, we'll kind of go down here, it's got these buckles on the hips that you can cinch in to give it a rakish look. And we'll come back up carefully here because I want to start over here. This shirt has the discharge emblem, aka the ruptured duck in the navy blue. This would let everybody know that you were no longer in the service, that you've been honorably discharged. Underneath we see the sailor's name of Don. Unfortunately, we don't have a last name. As we cross over, and you can notice that the buttons are missing. Almost every button is missing on this jacket. And I talked earlier about buying quality versus quantity, but this jacket is so unique that it was worth purchasing with the missing buttons. Now as we come over here to this side, turn into the light, you see there's a little Chinese emblem there. I don't know if that stands for Don in Chinese. Who knows? Pretty neat, embroidered right onto the pocket. Now this is where it gets cool, because as we go down, look at what's on the pocket here. Isn't that beautiful? Fully embroidered dragon. As we come over to this side here, same thing. Incredibly embroidered dragon, and it gets better. As you can probably see in the corner there, each cuff has the Liberty cuff. It says Qingtao, China, with the dragon right into the cuff, and I do have these cuffs rolled up so I could show you. We come over to this side here, same thing, additional dragon, Qingtao, China, absolutely gorgeous. Qingtao was part of the Shandong province. It's on the east coast of China, and it was home to the, I shouldn't say home to, it was the headquarters of the Pacific Fleet from roughly 1945 to 1949. Now, the kind of main thing on this jacket, we turn it around, it's almost considered like a tour jacket. Qingtao, China, 1946, and look at this full-length dragon on the back of this jacket. Absolutely stunning. Yeah, as I said, it's one of my favorite. I just wish we had a name for this sailor. Unfortunately, all we have is Don. And the person at the antique shop, I asked, and they said it had come in as part of an estate. They had no further information, unfortunately, but it was well worth it. And as I said, it's one of my favorite items in my collection. Zoom out so you guys can see that again. The final uniform I want to share with all of you in this episode is the standard United States Navy peacoat. I encourage all of you collectors out there, if you are looking to have uniforms in your collection, buy one of these. And I would buy it sooner rather than later, because what has happened is the peacoat has become a fashion statement in the general public. And when something becomes a fashion statement, the prices go through the roof and the quantity tends to diminish. And I've seen the quantity on peacoats they begin to dry up. I don't recommend that you run out and buy one on eBay or buy one in the primary market, because the prices have just gone through the roof. I would look for one, flea market, I would look estate sales, I would look garage sales and but see if you cannot add at least one to your collection. Because, when I think of the United States Navy during World War II, I think of the peacoat. It's just a fantastic, fantastic jacket. Now, how do you tell a World War II peacoat from a World War I peacoat from a modern day peacoat? An old-time collector once told me, look in the pockets and see if they have corduroy inside. So when we come over here and we open up this pocket, you can see kind of that corduroy material in there. Zoom in. Now, he told me that's a good indicator for a World War II peacoat. However, I have found that peacoats from the 60s and 70s have that corduroy pocket lining, so I don't like to use that. What I have found that seems to stand the test of time are the buttons. The World War II peacoat had what's known as an 8-button exposed front. So if we look here, you can see we've got 2, 4, 6, 8 buttons. I'll do that again. I'll use my fingers this time. We've got 2, 4, 6, and 8 buttons that are visible on this double-breasted coat. Now, it's known as a 10-button coat because if you come up here to the collar and you turn up the collar, you will find 2 additional buttons for a grand total of 10 buttons on the front of this jacket. That's a good indicator of a World War II era peacoat. After World War II, in that 1946 range, the Navy came in and restyled the coat. They dropped the front collar a little bit, the neckline, and the button front changed from 8 buttons exposed to 6 buttons exposed, with 2 under the collar for a total of 8. So it's imperative. 10 buttons is what you're looking for. 8 visible, 2 under the collar. And be careful, because sometimes the buttons go missing. So look for, if you flip up the collar and you don't see a button, look for where the button was attached at one time. Now, another way to help you date the coat is by looking at the tag, which should be inside above the breast pocket. And we flip this open here, you can see, and I'm kind of giving away a little bit of why I bought this coat, but you look in here and you can see this tag, manufactured by Naval Clothing Factory, name and rate. This right here puts this jacket in that 1943-ish range. And I say ish because it's not an exact science. The following tag would have Naval Clothing Factory with 100% wool and a size. And then the tag after that, which would put you into the 1945 era, would say Naval Clothing Depot. Okay, so this one, about the 1943 range. So that helps you to date the pea coat. Now, the reason I bought this was because of the condition. And actually, I didn't buy it. I traded for it, and I had to trade rather heavy, but it was because of what's on the inside. And you probably got a little peek there. But if we flip this open here, I'm going to try and turn it back so you guys can see it in the light here. Inside, we have this beautiful Liberty panel. It says Shanghai, China, 1945. It's kind of hidden a little bit by the hanger there, but just gorgeous. I cannot stress to you how vibrant the colors are with this. And if we go over here to the side, we'll see there's a whole additional Liberty panel with a huge dragon, open mouth, which also says Shanghai, China. This sailor was in Shanghai, China in 1945 and had these installed in his pea coat. What a beautiful thing. In all my years of collecting, I have never seen Liberty panels like this inside a pea coat. So this was just a fantastic addition. Now, we're trying to figure out how to display this. I'd love to display it open so people could see the dragons and such inside of here. But you have to be very careful. And I'm going to throw this at all of you collectors out there. Light is a huge enemy of militaria. And if you have a collection, especially cloth, I mean, helmets, things like that tend to be okay in the light. But things like uniforms, field gear and such, if you leave that in direct sunlight over long periods of time, it will begin to fade. If I put this on display and it's in direct sunlight or under a heavy light from my room where I keep everything, these colors will start to fade out. Now, sunlight's okay. I use the sun every year. I bring my uniforms outside. I hang them on a clothesline. I air them out. I check them for damage and such. And it's a good way to kind of air things out. I leave them in the sun for a couple of hours. But to do it repeatedly day after day will ruin your items. So what I recommend is if you put things on display, check to make sure they're not having light shine directly on them from a window. Direct light from light bulbs and that, and then rotate items. So if you have things on display, leave a coat on display for a couple of months, and then take it down and put something else up and let it rest in a dark closet. It's the best way to do it. Gosh, I love those dragons. Well, that concludes this inaugural episode. I do want to thank all of you for watching, and please feel free to leave comments, questions, and the like, and I'll be sure to get back to each and every one of you. I encourage you to subscribe, to like it if you liked it, and until next time, this is Steve reminding all of you to keep 'em rolling.